So there we go. I don't know all the shortcuts. Cool. So today we're going to talk a little bit about usability testing. So some of you might think, well, didn't we talk about usability testing already? Well, to some extent, yes. But I guess what we're going to get at today is to see what are the differences between usability testing and user testing, because there are some differences, and sometimes the concepts are, well, or the words are used sort of synonymous, the same in the same way. But from my point of view, it's always good to make it clear, just to make the wording clear as well. So, what's usability in the first place? It's a term that's used for quite a lot of things, and it's used quite loosely, I guess, quite often. There are several. I don't know how many. You probably can't count them anyway. The definitions that are out there. There are sort of one of the official definitions of the term usability is it's defined by the ISO. That's the International Standards Organization. So that's one of the official definitions, saying that it's the extent to which a product can be used by specified users to achieve specified goals with effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction in a specified context of use. So I think the important bits are the effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction. And you will see sort of other definitions out there that focus on slightly different aspects, but it's always sort of a combination of different aspects of use, I guess. And effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction are most of the time in there, but there are other definitions that are a little bit broader and include, for example, learnability or ease of use, how easy it is to learn how to use the system, and so on and so forth. So it's on the one hand, to some extent, objective measures that can be applied, for effectiveness or efficiency. You can think about, okay, well, we can measure that with task completion times, for example, or error rates. But on the other hand, the concept also includes subjective subjective aspects, like here, for example, satisfaction. And so today we're going to talk about some of those aspects, how to measure them, and how they are not measured, and how the concept of usability to some extent has shifted as well, over time. If you have a look at the graphic there, I think you probably have talked about the iterative designs with Mark, didn't you? Yeah. So that's something quite important. If we talk about usability, it's in general, usability is a sort of it should sort of accompany you on the whole way. When you design your new product, your new interaction technique, your new whatever you want to design. So usability should be something you think about all along during your design process. And so the idea is that you do not just one of those usability tests, but several of them. They can be, and they most likely will be, different kinds of tests, but they all fall under the same umbrella, let's say, of usability testing. So tests can be done quite early on. They can be done somewhere along the development process, and they can be done towards the end of your development then as well. So we talked about different aspects of usability, and it's not a complete list, I guess, but some aspects taken from different definitions. Well, some of those aspects are, as I said, look, learnability. So how easy is it for users to accomplish basic tasks the first time they encounter your prototype? And in general, and how easy is it to learn to use it? Well, you can probably relate to that as well. A lot of the examples from usability come from web design. That's where usability became, to some extent, sort of quite a strong focus and became sort of a mainstream research topic as well. Well, if you just think, for example, a e-commerce website. You go on, you want to buy something. So for an e-commerce website, it's quite a good idea to make sort of, the learnability of the website as easy as possible. If you have to learn how to use a website and how to make your purchase, if that's quite a long process of how to, to get to sort of the shopping cart and just the checkout procedure, that takes a long time for you to learn how to use it. Well, you probably just jump off the wagon and go to another site and buy your product somewhere else. So now for those types of systems, it's important to make it easy and straightforward to learn how to use the system. And but you can take this to other designs certainly as well. Sort of this idea of make it easy to learn. Well, efficiency. So once the user have learned how to use the product or the prototype, whatever, how quickly can they perform a task? Sometimes that's quite important. Sometimes it's probably not as important. It really depends on what you want to achieve. With office, products aimed at for example, an office environment where sort of efficiency can be quite important. You want to get jobs done as quickly as possible, probably. And other occasions, if you aim at probably more gaming type of applications, efficiency might not be one of your main focuses. Okay, so it really depends on what you're creating, what you're designing. So users have sort of used it once or twice. So when they return after a period of not using it, well, how easily can they get back into it? Is it sort of is it easy to sort of get to remember how to do things? And again, if you have sort of an e-commerce or e-shop or shopping application or e-commerce website, if it's easy for users to get really easily back into it, they probably just press one or two buttons and already have bought your product. Errors. Well, is it quite error prone, your prototype, or not? And it's not just a matter of is it quite error prone, but if errors happen, is it easy to recover from them? Or some products like with Windows, it's some if you get the blue screen of death, there's no way of recovering from that error unless you just have to restart. That's not ideal to some extent. You're just in the middle of of doing something and writing your thesis or whatever. Along comes the blue screen of death, and the only thing you can do is restart and probably lose what you've worked on for the last, half an hour or whatever, if you have sort of auto-saved anyway. So that's something quite important to keep in the back of your mind. Well, ideally, users can't make too many errors. That's the ideal case. But in case they make some errors, is it easy to recover from them? Something quite related to that is if users make errors, what's the error message like? And their Windows sometimes, I know it's quite a bad example as well. You most likely have come across those error messages when they say error happened in module. Then you get a number with a sort of a long string, and that's basically everything you get. And you think like, so error occurred.
No, let's say error, but no error occurred.
Okay, they're even better, So, the question. So, what does the user make of this message? Nothing. It doesn't help them to learn from the error. It doesn't help to recover from the error. It doesn't tell you anything at all. And so that's quite important. So the feedback you give to the users, that should be as valuable as possible. To give them something to work with, to learn from, to recover from. Satisfaction. That's quite important as well for all kinds of different interfaces. Especially if you're in the entertainment industry or you want to create a game, user satisfaction and experience becomes very important. And so there are other aspects as well. It's just, I guess, a short list, and with different definitions, you get different aspects, and really depends on what the focus of your research is. Just some examples of nice examples of what not is, probably not to do. So this is an example from a hotel, and you expect, you probably get, in all the hotels, different alarm clocks. So what do you, as a customer, expect, there to do? If you want to set the alarm clock, you want to make it as quickly as possible and not going through a huge learning curve. So there you have to go through a set of 5 steps explained in detail how to set your alarm clock. And that's basically not the ideal example of how you want to users have to accomplish this task.
Does it mean that the design of the alarm clock is not pretty good, right? If you need something.
The design of the alarm clock is not very good, because especially if you own the alarm clock at home, it's probably different because you've learned it once or twice, and then you know how to do it. And even if it's still 5 steps, it's probably not that much of a problem, because you can remember the steps, and you just press them. It sometimes becomes sort of second nature. You just press the buttons. You don't have to go through or look at the manual every time. But in an environment like a hotel, where people come and go, you're only there 1 or 2 nights, you don't want to go through the hassle of learning how to set an alarm clock. You just want to do it. And in an environment like that, sort of the learnability, it's a lot more important, because you just want to go there, press 1 or 2 buttons, and have the alarm clock set, basically. And I just remember that because last week I was in a hotel, and there it was very straightforward to set the alarm clock. I think it was only 2 button presses. It was press 1 button, set the time with other 2 buttons, and then once you release it, everything was set already. I didn't have to activate anything. You just had to press 1 button, set the time, and then everything was set. And so that was quite straightforward. I didn't have to go through 5 steps and read sort of a long instruction manual.
Yeah, but there are many aspects to see in this example, because I was thinking in standardization for this kind of process, and I was thinking in the learning aspect in the users, that some people doesn't need the instructions to set the alarm clock. And by the way, how do you find the equilibrium between explain the process for our users, and but at the same time design useful interactions?
Well, that's I think there's no straightforward answer to that. If I knew the answer, I probably wouldn't sit here and just be a famous user. Well, you know what I mean. Well, but that's the whole question we're talking about today. How to accomplish usability, and in the end, well, from my point of view, best answer can give you test those things with users. Observe users how they normally would set alarm clock. Ask them, observe them, test your design, and then find if that's basically this is something users would expect, if it's something that they're satisfied with, and if not, try to redesign your product with user input. And I think that's sort of the best answer I can give you for that. There's no one straightforward answer. There's like, okay, that's what you do. That's how you find this equilibrium, or how you put it. I think the best thing you can do, learn from current designs, adapt those designs, and then test it, and ask users what they expect. What would you do? How would you do it? Test it several times, and then you get somewhere when we probably can be quite comfortable of having designed a usable product or whatever. So another example there, so that's a screenshot from a banking application I took a while ago, and so if is there something you can spot where you think like, well, that's a little bit weird? The slider bar, that's well, certainly not ideal, but there's something most people probably would stumble over, and I did as well. I think since they changed the design eventually. So I'll give you a hint. So you set everything, your transfer, and so everything's set, and you want to proceed.
Next to back.
Yeah. So, and I don't know why that's not why that's not an obvious thing to put the next button to the right and the back button to the left.
It was designed in Japan.
Yeah. It's New Zealand. It's a New Zealand website.
Really.
And I think it wasn't just me, but I think there's several people who stumbled over that and pressed the back button. It's like, oh, what, and then you have to do it all over again.
You usually don't read the advices in the bottoms.
The only thing I could think of why somebody in a banking website would do that, with the brilliant idea, we want to make it safe and not just have people click through it, and just check.
That they pay.
But even then, it's a very bad design from my point of view, because you at least should then have a button where it's like are you sure or whatever, even that, but not the back button on the right hand side.
Yeah, it's really unusual.
Yeah. And I think sort of I have to check actually, but I think they've changed it over time. So. So just in general, what usability testing? So what is it? So the comic, it might be sort of quite comical to some extent, but that's something you will hear quite often. It's always a good idea to get sort of the actual designers of a prototype or of a product, watch people use it, and quite often they can't really believe that their design is not usable. If you design something for you, it's quite straightforward. For you, it's like, that's so easy to use. Why wouldn't anybody be able to use it? Quite straightforward. And that's where you hear often, just videotape users and let the actual designers or creators watch it to sort of get aha moments sometimes. So well, the issue is, and that's also sort of one of the points. It's not ideal for people with similar models, just behavioral models, to test your prototype, but have actual end users rather than developers test your application. Yep.
Talking about that, the culture have it's an important fact when you test the usability in the products. I was thinking in the example that you gave us before. For example, the interface between banks. For example, Kiwi Bank is totally different than my bank in Mexico, Banamex, and here it's really simple, and I believe that it's maybe not really safe to do electronic transfers, and this because it looks really simple. Not. And I was thinking, maybe it's my perception that in the Mexican website for banks are really complex, and you push all the time passwords, and you try to. But maybe it's just a sensation that.
Well, I think in the end, it's well, ideally you test your design or whatever your banking website with people who actually would use it. If you tested your Mexican website with Kiwi users, it probably wouldn't give you all the information, the proper information you want to have. So ideally, well, and certainly there's always going to be certain cultural differences and sort of different perceptions of different cultures. What you would expect to happen or to be in websites, for example. It's always better to test those designs with the actual end users and not with somebody else.
Yeah. But so what happened with the global products? I mean, for example, I don't know, computers or mobile phones.
Well, again, you ideally tested with then sort of a broad market. And there's with certain products or even websites. You have localized versions of websites. It's not always the same website for the entire planet. You sometimes have. It really depends. And sometimes you don't have to do it, but sometimes it can be quite important to have local or sort of specific designs for certain locations. Well, especially many Asian websites are. Yeah. It's not just because the language is different. It's because there's different just different design elements that are more important or for in different cultures. It's a matter of, as you said, with the banking website, of trust, for example, as well. And that's quite important aspect for many products that you want to create a product or a website where people can develop some trust while using it. That's something important. Their design elements can play quite an important role. So usability testing in the strict sense is basically have representative users, as I said, representative users of a representative sample of your end user population, performing representative tasks, meaning sort of tasks that would actually be performed by end users and not just some random, you don't tell them, just use it, you set them specific tasks, for example. It's like, okay, try to buy or try to make the transaction or try to transfer some money from your account to another account, for example. Then, you observe users doing it and during sort of those observations, you try to see if there's problems or issues arising. So the main goal of usability testing is to identify problems. And you want to do this as early as possible. Because, well, the earlier you can identify problems, the quicker you can fix it. And it's just as easy as that. And we had the discussions when we had the colleagues from Tate, and they appreciated that as well. And so they want to make a case that they want to test their designs as early as possible, and not just in the end. Because if you already have designed you're almost launching your product, and then you find some serious problems with the product, that can be quite expensive to fix. So in saying that, if you want to test as early as possible, you don't have to have a finished product. you can test with with prototypes, with early prototypes, and you can even do some testing for interaction flow, for example, with paper prototypes. You don't have to have actually a working prototype at all. For interaction, for example, you can have. Did you talk about this with Mark as well, with prototyping, paper prototyping? And there's so it can be quite valuable and helpful to create paper prototypes, or cards, card sorting, and all those techniques for getting to get an early insight into how people would interact and what they would expect the interaction to be. So it's like, okay, if you click this button, what would you expect to happen, for example? Then you can do this quite quickly with paper prototypes. Screen mock-ups, you can use different kinds of softwares to quickly put together a interactive prototype. You can use Flash or different kinds of tools to quickly put together sort of a somewhat interactive prototype. Again, you don't want to go through sort of for early testing. You don't necessarily have to develop everything right away, but you actually want to test some of your ideas, especially if they're new ideas, quite early on, to see if you're on the right track. So you want to identify features that are problematic, that are unclear. So is it if you design sort of new, I don't know, a new button layout, is it clear for the user where they would press, or where they how they can proceed to sort of a new screen, for example? Quite important, sort of the last point there as well. So what you are trying to research is basically the new interface, and not the user. So you're not testing a user; you're using sort of your new you're testing your new design, and it's more about sort of the general sort of preferences of users. And in early stages, not quite yet about performance. It's not about efficiency in the early stages, but in the early stages, more about preferences and what works and what doesn't work.
But what happened in the case, for example, that your interface or your product is complex and have some kind of learning stage, and the user is obligated to learn some part of the test, so some part of the process to understand the product and to use the product in a perfect way. So what happened in this case? Well, you can assume that the user will be all the time in the low level, or
no. Well, I guess then again this depends on which stage you are at testing it. But it's not with every product that it's straightforward to learn, or you just have to sit there and just use it right away. There's different kinds of products where you have to go through a learning curve. I don't know if you think, for example, for Photoshop, or 3D modeling software. There's no way that you can do usability test all the functions with novice users. So I guess either you could then invite a certain type of user that already know some of the concepts. It's probably less likely that you will design a completely new product that that has sort of a complete new user base where people have to learn everything from scratch. So you probably have to sort of strike a balance between finding users who already know some of the, I guess, concepts or ideas, and if it's important for them, or if it's necessary for them to go through a learning process, well, then you certainly have to include this in your testing.
Yeah, well, No, but I was thinking again in the bank websites that it's really sensible operations inside of the bank accounts, and all kind of people use the bank services, elder people, teenagers, and the middle user. So it's a general process that have certain level of complexity, and the difference between users is huge.
Well, sure,
learn the process to use.
Yeah, but the question is, I think that's it's not necessarily because it's a complex operation to do. It's not necessarily that or it's sort of there's several things to do that the interaction has to be complex. I think that's sort of one of the misconceptions. It's like, okay, it's complicated to do, so let's make the interface complicated as well. No, I think that's not necessarily the case. You can think of, okay, how can we make those steps easier? And well, from my point of view, there's no need for, or even for banking websites, for users having to go through a steep learning curve, because it's again something you don't want to make overly complicated, and just you want to design, even if it's sort of a sensible product like banking, you want to design this as straightforward as possible and not make it unnecessarily complicated, and even go sort of have people go through a learning curve. So I think, if it's necessary, or if there's no way around it, for you usability testing, you have to include sort of the prior learning in your test design, I guess. But I think sort of the overall goal still should be to keep, especially for to keep sort of the learning that's necessary in order to be sort of at a productive level with your design, with your product, to a minimum. I guess that's one of the overall goals then as well. So.
Probably if there's no escaping getting it complicated, then you want that as easy as to remember as possible. Even if you have to learn it, then the next time you use it, how to do it.
Yeah, maybe by repetition, the people. Yeah.
Especially with banking, people don't switch bank every day. So.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, they might switch the bank if we make it too complicated for them to operate the online portal.
Yeah, when I opened my bank account here, they took me through all the steps on online banking, up until the logout button.
Here is a special case, because here is really easy the way that you use the.
And I can appreciate that as well. It's in New Zealand for the banks, online banking websites I've used so far, there is a lot less security measures in place. Like, for example, I know in Europe, most banks have at least the what is it, the transaction 10? What's the 10? It's transaction something numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that. So I've got one bank, the Rabo Plus. They have the small calculator thing that just produces the random numbers. But shy of that, most banks otherwise have. You get a list of numbers, of transaction numbers, and then with every transaction you have to put in one of those. It tells you, please put in number 98, whatever, and then you put in number 98 and to make it.
My online gaming has one of those buttons you press. With the numbers, yet the bank doesn't.
Yeah. So yeah, but even then, I think I don't believe it's more complicated. It's just one additional step, but it's not necessarily more complicated to include more security measures. I believe.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
So one of the questions, one of the things I want to sort of talk about is the difference between usability testing and what we talked about so far about sort of user testing, research-based user testing. They're not necessarily the same. It doesn't help that a lot of times people just talk about usability testing when they mean user testing. And but from what we've talked about so far, usability testing has specific goals. And user testing, as we talked about earlier in the lecture so far, has specific goals as well. So again, with usability testing, your main goal is to find major interaction problems or just general problems with your prototype. You want to find if there's if people make make errors, if it's easy to learn, if it's intuitive, if there's sort of satisfaction is basic, or sort of what the satisfaction level with your prototype is. But that's not necessarily the same questions that you have with research-based user tests. Or to make it, to put it another way, if you find that your new design is usable, and you publish that in a research paper, why should the reader care about it? But that's what I find quite often, in research papers. Somebody designs a a new interaction or a new interaction technique, and they say, okay, we did a usability test, and it's we found the usability is satisfactory. So I think that so what, So usability, to some extent, is valuable for you as a designer or for a creator of a product, to get more information about your design and your design decisions, and but it's not necessarily interesting as a research question to some extent. It can be potentially, but it's not necessarily the main. The main research question, you should sort of you should have to some extent, and that's sort of probably my view, and I guess it's shared by others as well. So just think about it. Is sort of the usability, if you test usability, is it something others actually care about, or is it something you mainly care about? And from my point of view. Well, I guess it really depends. Sometimes usability can be a valuable piece of information in a research paper, but most of the time, I always have sort of the feeling. So what? So what? Why should I, as a reader, care about if you found sort of, oh well, that's a usable, so that's a usable product. Like, so didn't you have more important research questions to answer there?
In industrial design or engineering, I believe the usability could be useful for redesign, right? It's because have the data just to say that it's useful have no sense. It's a feedback that you can
exactly. So I think that's sort of the point, So usability testing has a place in your in your work, in your sort of design and creation cycle, but it's not necessarily the end point sort of, or if you I guess depends on your focus. If your focus is on product design, usability testing should always be an important part, and it's probably enough, because what you're interested in, if you design a product, you're interested in designing a usable product for an end user. And so usability testing is basically what you want to do. If you do research, what we most likely do here, at university, usability is part of your journey, I guess, usability testing, but it's not necessarily, it can be probably, but it's not necessarily your main research question. So some of the methods we talked about so far can be used for either or, for user testing and for usability testing, but there is differences in some of the methods then as well, and we're going to talk about some of those differences today. So, like sort of task time, task error error rates, and those measurements, they can be, for example, similar. If you're for usability, if you're question about efficiency, you measure task completion time, error rates, those type of things. Also, more qualitative approaches like observations, taking observations, qualitative analyses can be sort of the same in user testing and usability testing as well. But as we said, the goals of usability testing and research are most of the time different. So with usability testing, again, the idea or the goals is to fix, first to find and fix specific problems with your interfaces. And you do this with a few users. You don't have to go overboard, and we talk about this today as well, with the number of participants for usability testing, because that's not the main goal there, to have sort of a huge test. But we're going to talk about this afterwards. On the other hand, with research-based user studies, you want to actually generalize findings. So your main goal is not finding problems with your specific design, but you want to generalize findings out of your study. And that's why you do statistics. You don't necessarily want to find, okay, well, my specific new design is sort of usable, but you want to say, like, okay, if we design basically, well, again, if you compare, let's say, satisfaction with satisfaction or experience levels with a Kinect and a Wii, what you're actually more likely interested in is sort of the interaction that's afforded by a Kinect, and free, untethered interaction, without a device, compared to interaction afforded by a prop device. If there's a difference between those two interaction metaphors in terms of user satisfaction, how can this generalize to a population? So what can we learn of sort of this different types of interaction in terms of enjoyment or experience? That's more the questions you have in mind when you do sort of research-based user studies. So you want to generalize from what you've learned in your study. And not necessarily with usability testing. We do usability testing, you would say, like, okay, well, is it useful is the sort of the design of the Wii prop, whatever, is it usable or not? Well, and sort of I guess that's one of the questions. And is usability testing, can it be considered as research or not? Well, I guess it really depends. Sometimes it can be part of your research design, and but from my point of view, more often than not, it's not. It shouldn't be considered as sort of your main research approach, main research question.
But for example, if you are for industrial research, that you develop a new product and you compare with other products before yours, and this one have a better performance in usability, you cannot publish some kind of paper about
well,
that.
Well, again, depends. If you do classical usability tests, they would look different than with classical usability tests. You don't, for most of the time, you don't apply statistics to it, because you do sort of a lot smaller tests to find problems with the interaction. If you compare your the end product with a competitor, that's not necessarily a usability test. That's well, there's sort of different steps or different, well, you call them formative, summative testing, and those. So if you compare a finished product to another product, that's not a usability test.
Okay.
although some of the questions might be similar, you know, they might be, so which one's more efficient to use? But the main goal there is to if you do this, you know, you do it in a bigger study. And you don't have just 5 users use one product and the other product, and then like, oh, okay, we found that ours is more usable than the other. You would do this as a controlled user study, and then, you know, it can be different. Then, you know, it can be, it's just a different approach. Usability testing, in the strict sense, wouldn't compare the finished product to a competitor in a big study.
Mm.
So again, reiterate some of the stuff we talked about. So although they share certain aspects, you know, they approach things quite differently. For example, the first, it's with usability testing, it's valid, for example, to change your design or your prototype on the fly, because, you know, if you found a specific problem with your design, you already found the problem, so you can, you know, with the next user change, make some changes to overcome this problem, and then see with the next user if, you know, if this specific problem has, if you sort of have overcome this, you know, this specific issue, for example. You shouldn't, well, you apparently shouldn't do this with a controlled user test. You know, you shouldn't change from your product or your design from one user to the other. But with usability testing, that's completely fair to do. Because again, your main goal is to find problems. If you found problems, you know, you can try to tweak it and see, okay, if we change this, does the problem still exist, or did it go away? And again, you know, your goal is not to generalize to other interfaces, but you're interested in the specific product. And so there is quite a lot of research about usability testing, you know, to make sort of things a little bit complicated, I guess, into to split hairs and words. So this research looks into which methods, which usability testing methods are most effective, most cost-effective, and how many users you would need. And this is something we're going to talk about then in the next slides, especially about sort of to clarify some of the questions of how many users you need for different kinds of tests. Shall we take a break now? Yeah. Yeah. So that's, you know, just to remind that we just, you know, need sort of clear terminology. Because usability testing is often used for a lot of different things, but, you know, I just want to make it, you know, make a point that in the strict sense, usability testing is aimed at testing the usability of your design, and not necessarily more than that. So there's different approaches to usability testing. So most of the time what we're talking about is user-based testing, or usability testing in the strict sense. That's where users perform a set of tasks. But there's other approaches as well that are used for usability evaluation, usability testing. And these are expert-based inspection methods and or automated testing with software tools. And we're going to talk about mainly the expert-based testing methods now. So what does that mean? With expert-based testing, you don't invite end users to your usability evaluation, but you invite experts. So why would you do that? It's always the best thing to test a prototype or a product with end users. Well, yes, but in early stages it can be a good idea to invite experts, usability experts or product experts, to do some early testing with your design. So you don't necessarily need, in early stages, end users for the testing. So there's different things experts can do for you, and sort of the structured ways of testing are called either heuristic evaluation or cognitive walkthrough. And so these are typical procedures, usability evaluation procedures done by experts.
Sorry, I don't understand very well the meaning of heuristic. It's some kind of set of rules. Right?
Exactly. So we're talking about now about in more detail what heuristic evaluation means. So the heuristic evaluation, it's a usability inspection method. Inspection because it's used by experts and not by the end users. So the idea is basically that your experts go through your prototype or use the prototype, accomplish certain tasks with your design, with your prototype, and try to judge the interaction and what they do and what they encounter based on a set of those heuristics, sort of guidelines or rules to some extent.
But there are not strict rules. There are criteria and perceptions.
Yeah. Well, they're not strict rules, but it's sort of a list of those heuristics. So you could see it as a guideline.
Okay.
Yeah. We're going sort of there's several sets of those heuristics or guidelines out there. There are some more known ones. Nielsen, for example, Nielsen, he has quite sort of a famous set of, I think, 10 usability heuristics that are used very often. We have an example in the next slides then of those. And well, from what I've seen so far, so Nielsen's usability heuristics are the most commonly used ones. They are focused mainly on web usability. Some of them are general enough for that they can be used for other types of interfaces as well. But some are more specific to, I guess, desktop type of user interfaces or especially web type of user interfaces. So the idea then is that an expert, you apparently only have a small set of experts, so you can't invite 100 experts normally. You only invite a small set. There could be three experts, for example, 3, 4, 5 experts, as many as you can get. You don't have to, and you can't, and you probably shouldn't go overboard with inviting experts, and you probably won't get them anyway. So you only want to have sort of a small number of experts, and they go through a set of tasks with your with the prototype, with the design, and then try to judge if the prototype or your product complies with those guidelines, with those heuristics. So they are experts in terms of they have to know the heuristics pretty well, so that they don't have to look up, heuristic that, check. So ideally they are experts in using those and in knowing those heuristics and those guidelines, so that they can sort of quite easily judge if the design or the product complies with those guidelines. And in the end, the idea is for the experts that they produce a list of potential usability problems or issues where they find that certain things don't comply with those heuristics. So each, at this stage, potential usability problem, because they only can judge by their sort of expertise that it could be a usability problem or not. So you haven't established that yet because you haven't tested with the user to some extent. So that's why it's still a potential usability problem. So each potential problem is assigned to one or probably more of those heuristics. Sometimes it falls under more than one heuristic. And obviously, the more evaluators or the more experts you have, potentially more problems you'll find. Some of the problems will be found by more than one, but different people probably will find different problems. Well, there are certain advantages, disadvantages, I guess. Some advantages, it's can be relatively quick to get feedback. Inexpensive, well, can be either or. Inexpensive in terms of that you don't have to invite a lot of, well, many users, but experts, if you have them on call, and well, really depends what the rate for an expert is, I guess. If it's inexpensive or not. Well, advantage obviously is that feedback can be obtained quite early in your design process, and you get a good insight into what can be and what should be changed quite early on. Well, disadvantage is you have to find the experts in the first place, and it really depends on their expertise as well, how well they can perform this heuristic evaluation. And sometimes it's not easy to get experts, so that's one of the main disadvantages, I guess. And there's still the possibility, or, well, not just the possibility, but it's quite likely that there's still sort of some difference between, well, what's called the language spoken by sort of experts, or what they find as potential problems, what experts find as potential problems, to what actually users will find problematic with interacting with the prototype. So there's still the problem of different expectations, different approaches to interacting with a certain website or whatever it is you're coming up with. So we talked about the Nielsen interface heuristics, and this just gives you examples of those heuristics. So, and as you will see, they are, well, linked to what we talked about, aspects of usability. Well, obviously, because these usability heuristics, so the heuristics are quite tightly linked to the aspects of usability and the definitions we talked about in the beginning. So, visibility of system status. It says the system should always keep users informed about what is going on through appropriate feedback within reasonable time. Well, you probably can think about just not one occasion where you had an interface, you press a button, and you don't know, well, did I press the button? Did it sort of recognize me pressing the button or not? Something happening or not? So you probably can think of many examples where this happened to you with different interfaces, where you don't get feedback about what's going on. Sometimes, well, with Mac you get your rainbow. With Windows you get your hourglass. But sometimes you don't get that, and you don't know until you press the button again and again. And something, it could be network time or just slow network, whatever, So I guess you can relate to this problem quite easily. So another one would be match between system and real world. So the system should speak the user's language with words, phrases, and concepts familiar to the user. That's, well, can be done, I guess, to some extent by the experts to be judged, but ideally that's then still something you want to find out with actual end users if it really matches their expectations, the words and the terminology you're using. User control. So users often choose system functions by mistake. Sort of clearly marked emergency exit to leave the unwanted state without having to go through extended dialogue, blah, blah, blah. Consistency. Well, that's quite important. You want to keep interaction as consistent as possible. Ideally follow certain standards if at all possible. This helps a lot in terms of learnability and coming back to using a system. If you use a sort of a consistent interaction approach or use standard interactions, it's become a lot easier for users to learn how to use the system, and if they come back after a while not using it, how to get back into it. Error prevention, we talked about this earlier. Recognition rather than recall. Well, if you can recognize something by just look at it and just make it as visible as possible, because recognition is always easier than having to recall things out of memory. So just make actions as obvious and visible as possible. Flexibility, efficiency of use, aesthetic, minimalist design. Well, it's something you probably should strive for. It's not always easy or sort of always easy to achieve.
Because it's constrained by the technical.
Well, you always have constraints with all the heuristics. It's it's never most likely not easy sailing throughout your through your design. With most heuristics, you will come towards certain limitations, but it's basically just guidelines, I guess, that you should strive for in the end.
Yeah, but for me, it's amazing because the rules there are enough open to apply in any kind of situation or any kind of product, or including human interaction, for example. This kind of rules, I never seen this before, and it's really useful for everything.
No, definitely, yeah. Help documentation, quite important as well. So if users get stuck, you should give some options where they can look for further information or for help. So these are, and there's different sets of heuristics. Again, the Nielsen heuristics are the most known of.
When were designed these rules?
Huh?
When were designed, or when were
believe somewhere 94, probably, yeah. Early 90s, probably even earlier. I'm not.
When the internet started to grow up. Or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
someone around this year, but probably even earlier. But it could be 90. Yeah, it could be 94. That's So someone around this time.
Yeah, because I was thinking in the one designer, German designer Ram, who proposed some kind of these rules to design for industrial design, and there are a little bit similar.
Well, I'm not surprised. Most of the heuristics are pretty similar, and Nielsen didn't come up with them just out of nowhere. He probably borrowed quite a lot from others from design. It's just he's one of sort of the more famous guys in usability, and that's why when he published the heuristics, I don't know, I'm pretty sure he just borrowed from others, then as well.
Because
and all the other heuristics are many of them are shared or just formulated differently, but I think there's only a certain set of those guidelines that you can come up with then as well. But yeah,
these rules are focused for human-computer interaction. Nielsen are.
Yeah. And they are mainly, again, focused also on desktop interfaces, with some interfaces. Well, many of the heuristics are quite general, I guess, but they don't cover all sort of, I guess, interaction possibilities. So they don't talk too much about 3D interaction, for example, or 3D interfaces. That's where you have to, and there's no, to my knowledge, for example, for augmented reality type of interfaces, no common set of heuristics out there which is one of the problems for trying to do usability evaluation for augmented reality type of interfaces. There's no common set of those guidelines or heuristics out there for those types of new interfaces, emerging technologies. Both different reasons for that, I guess. There's they're not around for that long, like web type of interfaces or desktop type of interfaces. So, and they are more diverse in terms of hardware, input-output technologies, interaction techniques that can be applied. So they're more diverse than desktop and web interfaces. So that's why there are not that many of those heuristics out there for those emerging technologies. Or for human-robot interaction, I wouldn't believe that there's one set of usability heuristics out there for human-robot interaction that everybody relies to. I would be quite surprised. I'm not an expert in human-robot interaction, but I would be quite surprised.
There are a set of rules for human-robot interaction?
No, that's what I believe, that they are not.
I believe there are not, and they take from human-computer interaction.
Yeah. So many people sort of use those types of heuristics, like Nielsen heuristics, and try to apply them for other types of interfaces or research or emerging technologies, and many of them can be applied, certainly, the more general ones, but I believe they don't cover all potential problems that can arise with new types of interfaces. And so from my point of view, that would be quite an interesting research topic to see, to try to find a more sort of general or common set of usability heuristics for new types of interfaces. So another approach is cognitive walkthrough. So again, this is done by experts as well. So here they don't compare the interaction to a set of heuristics, but experts go through sort of a set of typical tasks users would try to do, and ask questions, a certain set of questions with each of those steps. So at each step in sort of all these procedures, the experts ask a set of 4 questions. First, will the user try to achieve the right effect with this step? So, for example, does the user understand what this subtask that this subtask is needed to reach the user's goal? So, for example, a user wants to print a document. So, is it does the user understand what he or she has to do in order to achieve this task? Is it where do they have to press? And do they understand what procedure they have to go through in order to get a printed document in the end? The next question they ask will the user notice that the correct action is available? So, for example, is the button they have to press, is it visible enough, or is it obvious enough? The next question that would be asked, will the user associate the correct action with the effect to be achieved? So, for example, the right button is visible, but the user does not understand what to do or what the button will achieve, so they will not click on it. So even if you have the print button in big letters there, it might be, probably the icon is not understandable enough. Probably the user doesn't recognize it to be a print button.
Well, I think print button, I hate print button, but then you get to print. I'm not sure if it press print, will it actually print right away?
Yeah. I actually have the same thing. Yeah.
For me, it's the same thing.
So and I'm actually most of the time go through the menu rather than press the print button. Yeah.
You can't make any changes anymore. Print.
I was thinking that I was the only one with this problem, but no.
I think apparently it's a quite common problem. Yeah.
Awesome.
But you do get to the print menu, don't you? Do you print right away if you?
Well, it depends a little on what program you choose.
Yeah.
Most things like
No, but usually in Microsoft Office is all the time this problem because you don't know if you're gonna go to the print menu or yeah.
The little print icon in Office just prints using default.
So should we make a test?
Yeah.
Okay, with the ribbon. Ribbon anyway. You know, she says
In your favorites.
Yeah,
there's no print button anyway. Is there?
Save and undo, but you haven't added print to that.
Yeah, it's over right here.
So you
Next to
have
the
to
save.
So you actually have to hit
See?
the glowy button in the corner.
See, it's an immediate fail anyway, usability fail. Because this ribbon, I don't know. Show me one person who likes the ribbon. Yeah, you do.
No, I don't like it.
Click the big glowy button.
Yeah, but no, but that's sort of the menu.
Yeah.
That's what I didn't want to do.
With the save button up at the top, you see the arrow on the very top of the screen.
Yeah.
A little arrow to the right.
Yeah, but it's not the button. Sometimes you can put it.
The arrow to the very right of the print at the top.
Oh, that one.
Yeah, you can add stuff to that. Quick print.
Yeah, okay, the quick print that would be right away. Yeah. Okay, and the print preview. Okay, I see.
Yeah, the one in the menu where you now.
So that one brings up the print. Okay, and the quick print would be sent the presentation directly to the. Yeah.
The hell's XPS document writer?
Yeah. Okay, but yeah, I think the issue is sort of is it
Quick print.
when it used to be in the menu, was it the print or the quick print?
Yeah.
Was the quick print? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but usually you don't want the quick print because you want to send some changes in your print setup. So it's not really useful.
That
The
top
quick
bar
print.
had more options, so you might be able to add regular print.
That one?
It says more commands.
Yeah. So you probably can, most likely. Well, you have
Oh, it's not.
print preview, quick print. Print preview.
I believe print preview is the menu of print, right? Print menu.
That says popular commands on up the top, the drop down. All commands.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure now you can.
Like regular print in there somewhere.
You work on Mac or PC?
Yeah.
I believe in this version, Microsoft Office, it's very similar between both platforms. But before, the last version was really different, and all the time I was
There's
confused.
regular print.
Yeah, well.
When I worked in
Prints,
Mac, it was really
yeah.
different when I started to work in PC. And
Okay. So anyhow,
Okay.
F5.
F5.
I swear it was F5. Yeah, it's old.
Ah. Okay, it starts from the. Okay, so the last question that would be asked for each and every step would be, so if the correct action is performed, will the user see that progress is being made towards the solution of the task? So is there feedback that that the task has been achieved? Well, with the print menu, you get sort of a small pop-up on the right. Has been sent to the printer. Do you get a message that it has successfully been printed?
Yeah.
In Mac, yes. No, in Mac, no, right?
I think you don't. I think the only message you get is that it was sent to the printer, but you don't get a confirmation that it was printed successfully. Well, you get an error message if it wasn't printed.
Yeah, but maybe it's not necessary because you have a physical output that the printing.
Yeah,
is
sure,
ready.
but I'm sitting in the office down the hall, so it happened.
Yeah, now it's different.
Well, it happened quite often that I was not patient enough to see if it's if I get an error message or not. I sprinted to the printer, nothing was there, and went back to my office and so like on hold or whatever.
In Windows, when you print, you can in the taskbar it actually shows you the status of the printer, so you can actually click.
Yeah, sure, but most of the time, I do know about it, but I can't. Well, I can't be bothered. I actually expect.
And then once printed, a little thing comes up. The document is successfully printed.
Yeah, that'd be That'd be actually quite neat. But yeah, because yeah. Okay, let's talk a little bit about user-based testing, because so far we talked about expert testing. So user-based testing, so you invite representative users, sort of representative sample of your end users, and they perform a set of representative tasks. Well, the earlier that can take place, the better, obviously. But you want to do this as frequently as possible. User tests, not just once, not just only in the beginning, but ideally throughout your development process. Well, actually, as often as you can afford to somehow. Well, user-based testing can take place early on sort of in all development phases, I guess. And the later it takes place, the less likely it will be that you can incorporate all the problems or just make changes to accommodate all the problems you found in those tests. So there's different types of those user-based tests. You know, those formative tests, they take place quite early on. So you can the paper-based tests. Wizard of Oz. We're going to talk about Wizard of Oz quickly in a later slide. So they are not necessarily done with a finished or with a highly developed prototype, but it can be done with low fidelity prototypes or even paper prototypes. That's why they're called formative testing. You're still you're forming basically the design. So that's they're done typically quite early on. So the goal here is to focus more on user perceptions, how users perceive the interface, rather than how efficient they are in completing a task. Because you're dealing with paper prototypes or low fidelity prototype, so you can't really get a good appreciation of task completion time, for example, and effectiveness and efficiency. It's more about user perceptions and interaction flow at this stage. So the focus is generally on design concepts at this stage.
What does it mean, low fidelity prototypes? Paper prototypes?
Paper prototypes, screen-based prototypes, for example, with Flash, for example, or
versions
or sort of some very early, can be even early prototypes of your design with only some interaction possibilities in there. So it's not a highly developed, not yet a highly developed prototype.
Invest so much time to do the early prototypes. This is the meaning that
exactly. And the main idea is that you get feedback early on about sort of general concepts, design concepts you have, and see if they are working or not. If you do design new interaction metaphors, to test this quite early on to see if you're on the right track and to make changes. If you do a paper prototype, it's quite easy to make changes. Yeah. If you already have developed your system, it's more difficult to change interaction flow. And so that's why it's a low fidelity prototype. It's not. Yeah. So summative testing takes place once you have already a more developed product or prototype. So you already have made some decisions in terms of design. You have incorporated those into a more sort of high fidelity prototype in this sense, because you already have sort of developed an already sort of working system. And here the goal is to evaluate the effectiveness of your design decisions, of your design choices. The validation tests, that would be what I would see sort of where the difference between usability tests and research-based user tests sort of becomes more unclear. So that's what we talked about. If you compare your system to a benchmark system or to a competitor system, and that's where sort of I guess the line between usability testing and user-based testing starts to blur somewhat, because that's where you try to find sort of an overall picture, basically, and you want to compare basically your finished design, your finished system with a competitor. And this can be, well, this normally will be done with a sort of a bigger user group and more representative user group. Oh, so not more representative user group, but with a bigger user group, and most likely will, in the end, you want to potentially also sort of come to some generalizations, or just to some, what you want to potentially generalize some of the findings found in those validation tests. So the question that comes up quite often, that creates some misunderstandings quite frequently: how many users do you need? So we talked about with research-based user tests that you need a certain amount of users for your statistics to make sense. So that still stands. And then there comes Nielsen, and just in his publication, I think that was even as early as '84, where he published Usability Engineering. And I think even in that book, he said, like, you don't need more than 5 people for your usability tests. And many students think like, oh, hey, well, Nielsen said I only need 5 people for my usability test, so that's what I need for my study. So, well, you actually, people start mixing things, basically, because on the one hand, so far we talked about user tests, research-based user tests. You want to do, you want to compare different, you have your research question, you have your hypothesis, and you want to apply statistics to find a question or to find an answer to your hypothesis and generalize this to the population. This is research-based tests. They are different from what we talked about today from usability tests. Usability tests are not concerned with those questions. Usability tests, again, are concerned, main goal is to find problems with your specific design as early as possible. So you don't need to compare this with a huge number of participants and do your statistics, but you only need a certain amount, a smaller sample of your end users who solve a certain set of tasks, and you observe them and see if everything's working fine, or if there are major problems in interaction. And that's why you only need few people for this type of test. Well, although it's still debated in research and sort of usability research about usability evaluation, if the number of 5 users is sort of the optimal number or not. That's basically what's out there and what sort of the argument of Nielsen is, because it just tries to visualize it with a graph like that, and he argues that with 5 usability evaluators, you find around 80% of usability problems.
That graph actually says about 6. If it's 5, you pass.
Yeah. Well, I think the graph is not totally accurate, but it's somewhere around, and I think it's anyhow between 70 and 80% of usability problems you find with 5 users, and the more users you have, the less, the gain in sort of percentage of problems you'll find will be. So he argues with 5 you find around 70 to 80%. With 10 you only find sort of around 90%. So the gain, with 5 people you only gain 10% in problems you'll find. So what he argues for your usability tests, get rather than inviting once 10 people, try to invite 5 people and at different stages during your sort of development. So if you have sort of access to 10 to 10, to 10 users. Instead of doing one test with 10 users, he said, he argues for do one test with 5 users, use the information you gained in this study to redesign your system, and then invite the other set of 5 people to do another test and see if you solve the problems or if there's still other problems apparent in your system. So again, usability tests are different from research-focused user studies, and so that's why you sort of don't need that many people, because you're not interested in generalization here. You don't want to generalize from the findings from this usability test to other interfaces. You're interested with your specific system, and that's why you don't have to apply statistics. You only want to invite a small set of users, let them try your system with a specific set of tasks, and see if there's major problems with interaction with other types of usability problems. So if it's exactly 5 or not, I think, again, that's open for debate. So the general guideline is get as many as you can afford to have in a certain time frame. Again, don't go overboard. Rather than having a huge sample once, try to have sort of smaller samples several times. 5 gives you a ballpark figure, but I think it doesn't have to be exactly 5 every time.
And sorry, in the second graph about ratio of benefits to costs, is the ratios benefits and costs is money or is?
Well, that's that. Yeah, exactly. So because inviting users. Generally, he talks about not the research labs where you just grab people from down the hall, but he talks about companies. And if you do usability testing companies, you normally, you should strive for that here in research, in a research environment as well. But most of the time, you don't. You just invite your colleagues most of the time. We talked about this issue again already, I think. But in companies, you normally invite. You always should strive for inviting people from actual end users of your system, and that's always cost involved. You have to pay them for their time, compensation, getting them there. So there's certain cost involved, I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
And so the idea is, if you plot the costs and the benefits you get, he argues there's a sweet spot around 5-6 participants, and then as you don't find that many more problems with more participants, but the costs still increase, the cost benefit ratio drops in the end.
Okay. Yeah, well, it was not clear that, for example, if you invest $1 million for contract evaluators, but when you launch the product, you obtain profits by $10 million. This is
I think it's sort of an overall simplification anyway. Yeah, but it's more just to show the general idea, that the time you invest in testing, it's not that much more worth than what you get out of it.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, well, just some more considerations, I guess, that inform how to design your usability test and how many people to invite for your test. Well, where do those tests, usability evaluations normally take place? Well, either in a fixed setting, like those usability laboratories. You probably have seen some of those setups in other places. So there's those usability laboratories normally, or have a setup like this. There's 2 rooms. One room where the user would sit, a one-way mirror, and an experimenter room where the observers or experimenters, the testers are located. And so they can observe the user either through the one-way mirror or through sort of video recording with screen capture and everything going on as well. So, and there's usability testing or evaluation software that incorporates different video feeds, for example, and so combines video with screen capture and timestamps, and then it automatically gives you some output. And there's different types of software out there. It's not free, most of the software, so you pay quite a lot of money. So usability evaluation is sort of, well, big business as well, and there's software companies selling specific usability evaluation software to usability companies.
And the same companies apply the tests for test products for other companies. For example, Microsoft contracts another company to try the product.
Well, either or. So you can have usability testing in-house, and big companies most likely will do it in-house. But there's companies who specialize just in usability testing and contract out their services. And there's many. There's many companies out there that just specialize in doing contract work for usability evaluation of other companies. So those tests can be done on site as well. So they don't have to be done in laboratories, but it can be done on site in the workplace or at home with mobile usability lab setups, or even remote via the web. For example, capturing mouse or just screens just over a network, for example, through video conferencing or through all kinds of different setups. Quite important as well for those user tests is a task list. So that's what you always want to have. You don't just throw them at, just go ahead and use the system, but normally you want to define a specific set of tasks and come up with a list of tasks that have to be accomplished by the users. You want to make this list as clear as possible, unambiguous as possible, and it shouldn't require any more further explanation. So the task should be as clear and easy to understand as possible for the user. If it's important to provide a background scenario at the beginning, do this. And when we talked about sort of learning, about if they have to learn certain steps in order to be able to use the system, well, that obviously has to come at the start. You have to give instructions how to use the system, or how to be sort of efficient in order to accomplish the tasks that you set for the user. And you also should make sure that the tasks you set can only be accomplished by using the interface, and not something that's sort of just common knowledge or can be used can be accomplished through other means. So again, try to sort of decide, well, and make it clear if the task has to be accomplished in a certain order. The user can skip. If other tasks require certain tasks require others to be completed first. Is there a limit for the entire session, or how should participants note if they're giving up on a task or move on? So sometimes you want to enable people just to skip on and just to move on to another task. Well, it really depends on your question then as well. That's something you have to decide, I guess, in the end. What's more important for you? Is it more sort of quantitative measures like task completion time, error rates, or is it qualitative measures like user experience or satisfaction? Many times it's a combination of both. So you want to have some measures that look into effectiveness and efficiency, where sort of error rates and sort of time are sort of those classic measurements for getting sort of a grasp on efficiency of the system. But sometimes you're also interested in more qualitative observations, and especially if you're interested in user satisfaction, for example, or as we said, your user experience with your system. There's when you want to gather some observations, and one technique that's used quite often in usability tests is what's called think aloud method. And that means that you encourage the user to verbalize what they're currently doing, so what they would expect to happen, for example. So the idea is that people like, okay, use the system, try to accomplish the task, and at the same time try to verbalize their actions. It's like, okay, now I'm pressing the mouse or this button, and would expect so I'm now pressing the print button, and now I would expect the print menu to open.
He had a conversation with the research while he's doing the...
Exactly, that's the idea. So as you probably can appreciate, it's really hard. It's not easy to do, and for many people, and for most people, it's actually quite hard to do this. And so it's not just a matter of telling them, okay, please just try to verbalize what you do. So there's some literature on this think aloud method and how to do it properly and how to increase your chances of getting some valuable results out of it. So we can't go into detail with that. But so I would encourage you, if you want to apply this technique, there's papers and sort of literature out there to give you some more information how to do this properly. You find it quite often in papers that people write. We applied the think aloud method, and most of the time I would be quite sort of surprised if it was whether or not it was used properly. So I would actually believe that most of the time it's not used properly when you read it somewhere. But anyhow, it can be quite valuable piece of information, but it's not always that easy to get this information out of the users. And especially what happens quite often, with the best intentions, users start verbalizing things, but then it just gets less and less and less, and you get concentrated in what you're doing, but you don't verbalize. And the issue is if you, as a tester, usability tester, try to remind people of, could you please verbalize what you're doing? You interrupt basically people in their work. So now if people are concentrating on accomplishing a task, and you as an experimenter start nagging, could you please tell me what you're doing? Could you please tell me what you're doing? Please. No, it's sort of a constant stream of interruptions, so that's not ideal either.
But it's a different kind of cognitive process when you verbalize at the same time that you are working in the computer than if you are only working in the computer. So maybe it's not a reliable method to identify.
Well, that's certainly a good point. So you get a certain type of information out of it, but yeah, it can be certainly have to take it with a grain of salt, sort of because it's a different type of task, cognitive task. Yeah. So you also can ask people to to go through or to verbalize what they've done in a what's called a reflection session. So after the interaction, that they tell you, sort of give you feedback or tell you what they've done, which can potentially overcome some of the problems, but has some other potential problems inherent problems, because you want to get people to remember basically what they did, and this has the potential problem of people rationalizing their actions and behaviors. So it's not, neither approach is sort of, or has its advantages and drawbacks to some extent. So generally, during a usability testing session, just try to decide beforehand how you handle certain situations. So if people get stuck, and can't move on, so what you do. Again, with usability tests, it's not that important that you that you take yourself completely out of the equation, because it's not again the main goal is not to generalize results afterwards, but to find major usability problems. And if you find people to get stuck somewhere, it's completely valid to sort of step in and ask, so well, what's the problem? Where do you have specific problems? And give hints as well. So well, make sure that sort of you get video audio recordings if possible. Again, ask for consent early. That's the same for research studies and usability studies. You always have to ask consent if you want to record audio or video or take pictures. And again, sort of feel free to make changes on the fly.
Why is the mayor finding problems with the tool?
Huh?
A couple of times.
To find, okay, yeah, it's not mayor.
And tool.
What do you say?
Yeah, there's some typos in the slide.
I
have to.
Right.
So the data you gathered, again, depends on what you want to do with the data. Most of the time, in our case, it's for you personally, I guess, or for your development purposes. Sometimes it can be valuable as a sort of additional piece of information in a research paper, or if you graduate and you decide to have your own usability company, if you're contracted to do usability tests, you have to, your stakeholder or your client will be could be an industry or a company. So the idea then would be, so it really depends on the report you have to create out of the data. So if it's, for example, a report for a company, just try to be as short and clear to the point as possible. List all the problems you found. List possible solutions, fixes for those problems. Obviously, never include data that identifies participants. Sort of all those things we talk about when we talk about sort of participants, confidentiality, anonymity, and so on. That all still holds for usability tests apparently as well. And just to finish off, a quick word about sort of other types, or some techniques that can be used in usability tests is, those technology probes. So a new piece of technology is put into a real-world setting, and you see how it's used by people. So that's sort of crosses somewhere between usability testing and ethnography, because you're sitting, you're observing people in the field how they use a new piece of technology. And what's used quite often as well in usability testing is what's called the Wizard of Oz method. So you probably know about the movie The Wizard of Oz. And so the idea there is, for certain types of prototypes, especially can be low and high fidelity prototypes still, where you don't have a finished system yet and you don't have all the interaction integrated into the system, but you still want to test it. So what you can do, you can have sort of a running or visually running prototype for the user, but you as an experimenter sit in the back and can trigger some of the actions. So if it's, you can, the user, for example, presses a button, and you, but that's not, sort of doesn't automatically trigger an interaction, but you as an experimenter sit in sort of behind the curtain as the wizard and trigger the interaction. Or quite often for sort of speech interfaces as well. If you don't have an already integrated speech recognizing sort of software or text-to-speech engine in the background, if that's not established yet, you as an experimenter can sit behind the curtain and listen to what the user says and type in the response, for example. That's done quite often in usability tests as well. Huh? Well, that would be quite a convincing Turing test, I guess.
It's a common method in human-robot interaction.
The Wizard of Oz, yeah, you'll find it quite often, yeah. So that was it for today. For assignment-wise, so the next 2 weeks are going to be thesis proposal work for you, I believe. And then there's a week or 1 week project after that. And the assignment will be to do a usability test as part of your 1 week project. So again, the goal is not a full-fledged user test, but a usability test to find, and this can be either a formative test or a summative test, probably more a formative test in this case for 1 week project. So this will be part of your assignment. Just do a usability test and report basically what you did and your findings of the usability test in a small project report or some slides. Cool, thanks.